It was 5:15 p.m. on a Tuesday in late October. The sun was just starting to dip below the massive oak trees that lined Sycamore Drive, casting long, golden shadows across the neighborhood. It was the kind of neighborhood where the grass was manicured with scissors, where the Homeowners Association measured the height of your hedges with a ruler, and where appearances were not just important, they were everything. It was a world of beige stucco, silent Teslas, and passive-aggressive notes on trash cans. I turned my truck, a heavy-duty Ford F-250 Super Duty covered in a thick layer of gray job site dust, onto my street. The engine rumbled with a deep, guttural growl that always seemed out of place among the hybrid SUVs of my neighbors. I was tired. Bone tired. I had spent the last 10 hours supervising the concrete pour for the foundation of the new downtown Children's Hospital wing. My steel-toed boots were caked in dried mud, my flannel shirt was stained with sweat and hydraulic fluid, and my muscles ached with that specific, heavy fatigue that comes from an honest day's work. All I wanted was a hot shower, a cold beer, and to sit on my back porch with my wife. But as I approached house number 405, my house, I saw something that made me hit the brakes so hard the seatbelt locked against my chest, knocking the wind out of me. At first, I thought it was a prank. Maybe the neighborhood kids were messing around. My front lawn, usually a pristine carpet of Kentucky bluegrass that I maintained myself on weekends, was covered in fabric. Heaps of it. Piles of color scattered across the green like debris from a plane crash. I squinted through the windshield, my heart rate spiking. That wasn't just fabric. There, draped tragically over the thorns of the prize-winning rose bushes, was my vintage Seattle Supersonics jersey, the one signed by Gary Payton. Soaked in a muddy puddle near the driveway were my favorite Levi's work jeans. And there, fluttering from the lower branch of the dogwood tree like a surrender flag, was my Italian silk tie, the silver one I had worn on my wedding day. Then, the sprinklers turned on. Ch. The automated irrigation system hissed to life, shooting arcs of cold water across the lawn. I watched in horror as gallons of water sprayed directly onto my wardrobe. My leather jackets were glistening wet. My limited edition Air Jordan sneakers were filling up like tiny boats. My underwear was scattered near the mailbox. All of it, soaking wet, ruined, and displayed for the entire neighborhood to see. I looked across the street. Mrs. Higgins, the elderly neighbor who spent her days spying from behind her lace curtains, was standing openly on her porch with her hand over her mouth. The mailman had stopped his truck 3 houses down and was staring. A jogger had actually stopped to take a picture with her phone. I didn't just feel anger. I felt a cold, sharp humiliation that started in my stomach and worked its way up to my throat. This wasn't just a fight. This was a public execution of my dignity. I parked the truck, leaving it idling in the middle of the driveway, blocking the path. I stepped out. My heavy work boots crunched loudly on the pavement, a stark contrast to the quiet suburb. I walked toward the front door, stepping over a pile of my own soaking wet socks. The front door opened before I could even reach for my keys. Beatrice stood there. My mother-in-law. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she carried herself with the arrogance of a giant. She was wearing one of her signature leisure sets, expensive beige cashmere that cost more than my first car. Her hair was perfectly coiffed in a stiff, blonde helmet. She held a crystal glass of Chardonnay in one hand and my spare house key in the other. She looked at me, then at the wet clothes on the lawn, and smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a cat that had finally pushed the vase off the table and enjoyed the sound of it shattering. "Good," she announced, her voice shrill enough to carry across the street to Mrs. Higgins. "You're here. I was hoping you'd arrive before the garbage truck. Although, looking at that pile of rags, it's hard to tell the difference between your wardrobe and trash." "Beatrice," I said, my voice dangerously low, vibrating with suppressed rage. "What the hell is this? Why are my clothes in the mud? Why is my jersey on a rose bush?" "Because, Jason," she took a slow, deliberate sip of wine, enjoying the moment. "I am cleaning house. Literally and metaphorically. My daughter has suffered long enough living in this squalor. Living with a man who comes home smelling like wet cement and cheap fast food. I'm putting an end to it. You're putting an end to it? I asked, stepping onto the porch, water dripping from the eaves onto my neck. Beatrice, you've been a guest in this house for 3 months. You came here because your condo was being renovated, and we took you in. You don't get to throw my things out. Guest? She laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Oh, honey. I'm not a guest. I'm family. And more importantly, I'm the matriarch. I convinced Sarah this afternoon. We had a long talk. She finally sees the light. She deserves a doctor. Or a lawyer. Someone with status. Not a laborer. She spat the word laborer like it was a slur. Like it was a disease. I looked at her. I saw the disdain in her eyes. She hated my truck. She hated my boots. She hated that I worked with my hands. I reached for the door handle. Get out of my way, Beatrice. I'm going inside to call Sarah. We are going to settle this right now. I tried the handle. It was locked. I reached into my pocket for my key ring. I slid my key into the deadbolt. It didn't turn. It didn't even go all the way in. It jammed halfway. Beatrice dangled a shiny new brass key in front of my face, jingling it like she was teasing a dog. Don't bother, she smirked. I called a locksmith an hour ago. He was very charming. I told him I was the grandmother protecting the home from an estranged, unstable element. He changed the cylinders on all 3 doors. You changed the locks? I whispered, staring at the brass key. On my house? Without my permission? It's Sarah's house, she corrected sharply, her eyes narrowing. And as her mother, I am acting as her proxy. Now, get off the porch. You're dripping mud on the welcome mat. The sprinklers are set to run for another 20 minutes, so I suggest you grab a garbage bag and collect your things before they mildew. I stood there stunned. The audacity was breathtaking. But as I looked at her smug face, I realized something. She didn't know. She really, truly didn't know. To Beatrice, I was Jason the construction worker. When she moved in 3 months ago, she saw me leave every morning at 5 a.m. in a dirty truck. She saw me come home at 6 p.m. covered in dust. She saw the calluses on my hands. She assumed that because I worked with my hands, I lived paycheck to paycheck. She assumed that Sarah, who worked as a junior marketing associate making $45,000 a year, was the breadwinner. She assumed Sarah paid the mortgage on this 4-bedroom colonial in the best school district in the state. Beatrice was a snob. A broke snob, living off shrinking alimony from her 3rd divorce, but a snob nonetheless. What Beatrice didn't know, because I never felt the need to brag, was that I didn't just work on the site. I owned the site. I owned JM Heavy Industries. I had started with 1 shovel and a loan 10 years ago. Now, I had 60 trucks in my fleet. I had contracts with the city, the state, and 3 major hospital networks. Last year, my company netted $12 million in profit after taxes. I drove the dirty truck because I liked being on the ground with my guys. I lived in this house because it was modest and close to Sarah's parents. And the mortgage? There was no mortgage. I bought this house with a single cashier's check 3 years ago. Sarah isn't home, Beatrice, I said, looking past her into the foyer. Her car isn't in the driveway. Where is she? She's at her spin class, Beatrice lied smoothly, taking another sip of wine. I told her to take her time. I told her I would handle the transition. She agrees, Jason. She knows it's time to move on. She looks at her friends with their banker husbands and their summer homes, and then she looks at you, sleeping on the couch after a hard day of digging holes. It's embarrassing for her. She took a step back, retreating into the safety of the house. Now leave, she commanded. Or I call the police. And in this neighborhood, Jason? Who do you think they'll believe? The terrified elderly mother protecting her daughter's home, or the angry, dirty man pounding on the door? She had a point. I looked down at my muddy boots. I looked at her cashmere. To the cops, I looked like the threat. I took a deep breath. I stepped back off the porch, back into the spray of the sprinklers. "Okay, Beatrice," I said, raising my hands in mock surrender. "You win. You changed the locks. You threw out my clothes. You run this house." Finally, she sniffed. "Some acceptance. It's for the best, Jason. Go find a girl who likes dirt. You don't belong on Sycamore Drive." She slammed the heavy oak door. I heard the deadbolt slide home with a definitive click. I stood in the driveway for a moment. I looked at Mrs. Higgins across the street, who was still watching. I gave her a little wave. She quickly closed her curtains. Beatrice was watching from the living room window, sipping her wine, gloating. She thought she had evicted a squatter. She thought she had one. I grabbed a black trash bag from the toolbox in my truck bed. I started picking up my soaking wet clothes. My jersey was ruined. My leather jacket was heavy with water. I threw them into the bag and tossed it into the back of the truck. I climbed into the cab and shut the door. The silence of the interior was a relief. I put the truck in gear and drove away. As I turned the corner at the end of the block, I saw Sarah's silver sedan driving toward the house from the other direction. She waved at me as we passed, looking confused why I was leaving. I didn't wave back. I kept driving. If Sarah was innocent, she was about to walk into a war zone. If she was guilty, if she really agreed with her mother, well, she was about to be homeless too. I pulled into the parking lot of the Grand Hyatt downtown. I needed a war room. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in months. "Blackwood and Associates, Real Estate Law," a crisp voice answered. "Arthur," I said, my voice calm but hard as granite. "It's Jason Miller." "Jason? To what do I owe the pleasure? Buying another complex? Need us to review a commercial lease?" "No," I said, staring at the valet who was eyeing my dirty truck with suspicion. "I have a situation at my primary residence. I have a trespasser who has illegally evicted the homeowner, destroyed personal property, and is currently occupying the premises." "Jesus," Arthur said. "Do you want me to call the sheriff? We can have a deputy there in 20 minutes. "No," I said. "The sheriff will just say it's a civil domestic dispute. He'll tell us to work it out. I want to go nuclear, Arthur. Beatrice thinks she's the lady of the manor? Fine. I want you to pull the deed. I want you to pull the utility records. I want you to draft an emergency order for immediate ejectment of unauthorized occupant." "I can have that ready in an hour," Arthur said, the sound of typing already audible in the background. "But Jason, who is the occupant?" "My mother-in-law," I said. "She changed the locks. She thinks Sarah owns the house. She thinks I'm just a broke construction worker." Arthur paused. Then he let out a low, dark chuckle. Oh, she has no idea, does she?" "No idea," I said. "I'm going to stay at the hotel tonight. I want you to meet me at the house tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And bring the papers. I want to serve her personally." "What about Sarah?" Arthur asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I guess I'm about to find out whose side she's on." I checked into the hotel. I scrubbed the concrete dust off my skin in the shower. I ordered room service. I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, thinking about my house. My sanctuary. The place I bought to keep my family safe, now occupied by a tyrant in Kashmir. I found out later what Beatrice told Sarah that night. When Sarah came home and found the locks changed, she panicked. She tried to call me, but I had turned my phone off. Beatrice met her at the door wearing my bathrobe. She lied. She told Sarah I came home drunk. She said I was screaming, violent, throwing things. She said I abandoned them. She gaslit her own daughter to steal my house. The next morning, the sun rose over Sycamore Drive, painting the suburbs in innocent pastel colors. At 9 a.m. sharp, a black Lincoln Navigator pulled up to the curb of House 405. I stepped out. The neighbors who were watching didn't recognize me. I wasn't wearing my Carhartt work pants. I wasn't wearing my muddy Red Wing boots. I wasn't covered in concrete dust. I was wearing a charcoal gray bespoke suit from Suit Supply, a crisp white shirt, a navy tie to replace the one ruining in the trash, and polished oxblood leather shoes. Beside me stepped Arthur Blackwood. Arthur was a man who looked like a shark that had learned to walk upright. He carried a leather briefcase and a look of absolute boredom. "Nice neighborhood," Arthur commented. "Shame about the pest infestation." "We're handling the extermination today," I said, adjusting my cuffs. We walked up the driveway. I didn't knock. I rang the doorbell. Once. Long and loud. Inside, I heard footsteps. The door opened. Beatrice stood there, holding a spatula. The smell of bacon wafted out. She was cooking breakfast in my kitchen. When she saw me, her jaw dropped slightly. She didn't recognize me for a split second. The laborer was gone. The executive was standing on her porch. "Jason?" She squinted. Then, the sneer returned. "Oh, look at you. You cleaned up. Did you rent a suit for court? It doesn't fit your personality, honey. You look like a waiter." "Morning, Beatrice," I said calmly. "Is Sarah home?" "She's having breakfast." Beatrice blocked the doorway with her small frame. "And she doesn't want to see you. I told you last night, you are evicted. The locks are changed. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police again. In fact..." She turned her head and shouted into the house. "Sarah! Call 911! He's back! And he brought a friend to intimidate us." Sarah appeared in the hallway, wearing pajamas, looking tired and swollen-eyed. She saw me. She saw the suit. She froze. "Jason?" she whispered. "Mom said you were drunk. She said you abandoned me." "I didn't abandon you, Sarah," I said, looking over Beatrice's shoulder. "Your mother threw my clothes in the mud and locked me out. But we can talk about that later. Right now, we need to talk about property rights." "Leave!" Beatrice shrieked, pushing my chest. I didn't budge. "I am the lady of this house. I am protecting my daughter's asset." "Actually," Arthur spoke up, his voice dry and piercing. "That is the point of contention." Arthur stepped forward and handed Beatrice a thick stack of papers stapled in blue legal backing. "Mrs. Beatrice Vance," Arthur said, "you are hereby served with an order of ejectment, and a restraining order barring you from the premises of 405 Sycamore Drive, effective immediately." Beatrice laughed. She actually laughed. She took the papers and threw them on the porch floor, just like she had thrown my clothes. "You can't eject me," she crowed. "My daughter owns this house. It's marital property. And since he abandoned it, she has sole possession. I am her guest. You can't kick out a guest." "Sarah," I asked, looking at my wife. "Did you tell her?" Sarah looked down at her feet. I tried, Jason. She never listens. She assumes." "Assumes what?" Beatrice snapped. "Assumes that you bought this place with a mortgage you can barely afford on your construction salary?" "Sarah, tell him to leave." "Mom," Sarah said softly, "Jason doesn't have a mortgage." Beatrice froze. "What?" I bent down and picked up the papers Beatrice had thrown. I dusted them off. I opened the file to page 1, the deed. "Read it, Beatrice," I said, holding it in front of her face. She squinted at the text. "Grantee, Jason Michael Miller. Purchase price, $650,000. Date of purchase, August 12, 2021. Prior to marriage. Mortgage lien none?" "I don't understand," Beatrice stammered. "Prior to marriage?" "But..." "Sarah said you bought it together." "I bought it," I corrected. "Cash. From the profits of my company's Q3 earnings that year." "Company?" Beatrice looked at my suit. You dig ditches." "I own JM Heavy Industries," I said, stepping into the foyer, forcing her to back up. "I don't dig ditches, Beatrice. I build hospitals. I pave highways. I employ 200 people. Last year, my personal tax return showed an income of $1.4 million. Beatrice's face went pale. The spatula fell from her hand and clattered onto the hardwood floor. Millions? She whispered. She looked at Sarah. You knew? You knew he was rich? He's not just rich, Mom, Sarah said, finally finding her voice. He's brilliant. And he's humble. He doesn't flash it around because he hates people who judge others by their wallets. People like you. The silence in the hallway was deafening. But Beatrice scrambled for a foothold. But I'm your mother. I live here. You invited me. I invited you for 2 weeks, Sarah said. It's been 3 months. And last night? You lied to me. You said Jason was drunk. You said he was violent. You tried to destroy my marriage because you wanted me to marry a doctor. Sarah looked at me. I didn't know she changed the locks until I got home, Jason. I swear. I looked at my wife. I saw the exhaustion. I saw the manipulation she had lived with her whole life. I believe you, I said. Then I turned to Beatrice. Arthur, I said. What is the penalty for illegal eviction and destruction of personal property in this state? Arthur checked his watch. Treble damages for the property destroyed, that's the silk ties and the leather jackets. Plus statutory damages for the lockout. And since she called the locksmith fraudulently claiming ownership, that's fraud. I looked at Beatrice. She was trembling now. The matriarch act was gone. She was just a small, mean woman in a stolen bathrobe. Get your things, I said. Where will I go? She cried. My condo isn't ready. I have no money for a hotel. You have your alimony, I said. Or maybe you can stay with one of those doctor friends you wanted Sarah to marry. Sarah. Beatrice turned to her daughter, pleading. You can't let him do this. I'm your mother. Sarah looked at the woman who had thrown her husband's clothes on the lawn. She looked at the man who had built an empire but still drove a dirty truck to stay humble. Jason is the owner, Mom, Sarah said, crossing her arms. And as the owner, he makes the rules. You heard him. Get your things. Beatrice stood there for a moment, stunned. Then, she ran upstairs, sobbing. I looked at Arthur. Wait here. I'm going to make sure she doesn't steal the towels. 10 minutes later, Beatrice was standing on the curb with her 2 suitcases. The same curb where she had thrown my clothes the day before. The neighbors were watching again. An Uber Prius pulled up. The driver looked confused. Beatrice? He asked. Just go, she snapped, throwing her bag in the trunk. She didn't look back. Peace lasted exactly 10 days. For 10 days, Sarah and I lived in bliss. We changed the locks again. I bought new clothes. The house felt lighter. Then, the process server arrived. He caught me in the driveway at 6 a.m. He handed me a thick envelope. Superior Court. Plaintiff, Beatrice Vance. She was suing us. I opened the file. She was claiming constructive eviction, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and reimbursement for improvements. She claimed her interior design advice was worth $15,000. She wanted a settlement of $50,000 to go away quietly. I showed Sarah. She went pale. She's suing us? Her own daughter? She thinks we'll pay it to avoid the embarrassment, I said. She's wrong. I called Arthur. Arthur, I want a full audit of Beatrice's finances. Specifically, I want to know where her money comes from. She claims she's on a fixed income, but she wears Chanel. Find the leak. 2 days later, we sat in a mediation conference room. Beatrice was there with a cheap lawyer. She looked smug. We are prepared to settle for $45,000, Beatrice interrupted. And an apology. Arthur sat silently. He placed a single file on the table. We aren't settling, Arthur said. We are countersuing. For what? Beatrice scoffed. Some wet clothes? No, I said. For theft. Grand larceny. I opened the file. Beatrice, when we audited your finances, we found a curious recurring transfer. Every month, for the last 5 years, $500 was transferred from Sarah's old joint savings account into your personal checking account. Sarah gasped. She covered her mouth. My college fund? The account you said the bank froze? You had access, I said to Beatrice. You stole $30,000 from your own daughter to pay for your lease on that Mercedes. Beatrice turned gray. That was a management fee. And then there's the credit cards, Arthur continued. 3 cards opened in Sarah's name. Maxed out. Total debt, $42,000. That's identity theft, Beatrice. We are prepared to go to the district attorney today, I said. Unless you sign this. A permanent restraining order. A full confession of debt. You assume the credit card payments immediately. And you vanish. Beatrice looked at Sarah. Sarah looked back with tears of betrayal. Sign the paper, Mom. Or I swear, I'll drive you to the police station myself. Beatrice signed. Her hand shook so hard the pen tore the paper. 6 months later. The gala for the Builder of the Year awards was held at the downtown convention center. I wasn't wearing a rental tuxedo this time. I was wearing my own. Sarah stood beside me in a red dress, looking stunning. She had started her own marketing firm with the seed money I gave her, money that Beatrice couldn't touch. And the winner of the Public Works Contract of the Year, the announcer boomed, is JM Heavy Industries. Applause thundered. I walked up the stage and accepted the glass trophy. A photographer snapped a photo. I smiled. I knew Beatrice would see that photo. A week later, I was inspecting a new job site near the mall. I was back in my work boots and hard hat, feeling comfortable in the dirt. I decided to grab a coffee at the food court. As I stood in line, I saw a woman clearing tables. She was wearing a brown uniform and a hairnet. She looked tired. Older. It was Beatrice. She had lost the condo. Without the stolen money from Sarah, she couldn't make the payments. Her credit was ruined from taking back the debt. Her rich friends had abandoned her. She was wiping a table with a dirty rag. She looked up and saw me. I was standing there in my dusty clothes. For a second, she looked like she wanted to sneer. But then she remembered the deed. She remembered the millions. She looked down at her rag and wiped the table harder, turning her back to me. I didn't say anything. I walked over to the tip jar on the counter. I pulled out a $100 bill. For the cleaning staff, I told the cashier, loud enough for Beatrice to hear. They do the hard work. I walked away. I got into my dirty truck. I drove home to my beautiful wife, in my paid-off house. The clothes Beatrice threw on the lawn were long gone. The silk tie was ruined, sure. But the grass? The grass had grown back greener than ever. It turns out, sometimes you need a little dirt to make things grow. And sometimes, you need to take out the trash to finally breathe fresh air.